Hello out there from the Badger Rock Kitchen. Here we are for the next in our virtual cookie workshop series, and the seasonal vegetables we're working with today are all things that you may have planted in about middle of April in your garden, and if you did, it's very likely that they are about ready to harvest right now. And those plants include cabbage, green cabbage. Our red cabbage is not ready yet. That one usually takes a little longer, but our green cabbage is ready to pick. Onions, if you planted them in mid-April, also should be ready to pick or already been picked and cured. Potatoes, we are going to be digging our first planting of potatoes out this week and next week from the garden. So these are ready if you planted them in mid-April. And carrots. If you planted them in mid-April out in the garden, they might not be quite this big yet, but they're getting there. We have some that we planted in our hoop house in February that are looking ready to go. So what we're going to make is two different dishes that use onions, potatoes, and cabbage from two different cultural food traditions. And the first one that we're going to make is a Badger Rock favorite. We make these with students almost every year because it's a great dish to make using cabbage and potato that's also delicious and also really pretty healthy. It has no meat. It is just a pure vegetable dish, but you would never know eating it because the flavors are so good. So it is called an Ethiopian cabbage. And what we're going to do to make it, it's so easy, you all. Just as many of the things we make in this kitchen, easy and fast, delicious and healthy. And so we're going to dice up this onion to start. I'm making a half recipe, but we'll post the recipes in the comments so that you all can make them at home, and we'll post the full recipe. So for a full recipe, you would use 1 onion. You would use about 5 potatoes. You would use about 4 carrots, and you would use about a half a head of green cabbage. So how simple is that for ingredients? And so I just diced up this onion. The carrots, I'm just going to slice. The thinner you slice them, the faster they'll cook, but it's up to you how big you want your pieces of carrot. I kind of like bite size, so I'm just going to get this thinly sliced is what I'm going for here with the carrot. And a full recipe you would use 4, but I'm going to just make a little half recipe here since we're making a second dish as well. And make 2 carrots. Just slice them on up. If you have never had a carrot fresh out of the garden, it is like a different vegetable than the ones you get in the store. When you grow carrots, they are full of sugar, like Mother Nature's sugar, carrot sugar. When you pull them out of the garden and you bite into them, they are so sweet. Once they sit on the shelf for a while, all those sugars start to convert into starches. So when you buy carrots in the store, chances are a lot of those sugars, they've been in transit, right, for who knows how long. They're storage crops, so they can sit around for many months. And a lot of those sugars have already turned into starches. And that is why a homegrown carrot will beat a store-bought carrot, in my mind, anytime. Over here on the stove, I have 2 things going. I have some potatoes boiling, and I have some cabbage boiling. And this is for the second dish that we're going to make, which is an Irish potato cabbage dish called Colcannon. So I'll show you that one in a minute. But the start for this is boiling your potatoes and boiling your cabbage until they're tender. So I got those going ahead of time. And over here, back to our Ethiopian cabbage. When you get to the potatoes, depending on how much time you have, potatoes are like carrots. The smaller you chop them, the quicker they cook. So if you don't have a lot of time, make your carrot pieces pretty small. If you want to cook your potatoes ahead of time slightly, I'll often do that to kind of cheat this recipe and make it a little quicker. So you can boil your potatoes just until they're a little bit tender before putting all of these ingredients together if you'd like. And that'll just speed up the cooking process, because this recipe you make in a saute pan. And if your potatoes are not cooked through, the recipe just is not the same. You want to make sure the potatoes are nice and cooked through. And if you start with them completely uncooked in your pan, sometimes They will start to stick to the bottom of the pan too, which is a little bit delicious because they get cooked in all that nice oil on the bottom, and then you get to scrape the, the brown, delicious, slightly fried potato bits off. But if you don't want to deal with all of that, if you cook your potatoes ahead of time, at least slightly, they will need to cook for a shorter amount of time in that saute pan, and you won't end up with so much sticking, so much potato sticking. I like to keep the peels on my potatoes just for the extra nutrients, but if you are a person who doesn't like the texture of potato peels, you can certainly peel them off before you make this recipe. So simple, y'all. We have potatoes, we have onions, we have carrots, and we have cabbage. And this cabbage is freshly harvested by the elementary school kids we're working with from Southside Summer School this morning. So it doesn't get much fresher than that. And for the cabbage, you can use a cheese grater if you want to make it really nice and small, or you can just cut it like I'm doing. I've done both. Both are delicious. You can't go wrong. This dish, I have never made it in a way that is not delicious. So I'm just going to cut these cabbage into a little bit smaller pieces just so they can fit on your fork into kind of a bite size when you're ready to eat them. So these are the ingredients right here for your Ethiopian cabbage. And what we're going to do is I'm going to grab, this is my favorite saute pan in this kitchen, even though it's pretty funky looking. It's been around the block a few times. And we're going to actually add a really decent amount of olive oil. The recipe calls for half a cup, and you don't want to skimp on the olive oil because you'll end up with some serious sticking of ingredients. And that fat is kind of pulls the flavors all together and makes it extra delicious. So I just put about a half a cup of olive oil into the bottom of this pan, and I'm going to pop it over onto the stove, and I am going to throw in my ingredients. If you are a somewhat lazy chef like me, you can just throw them in all at the same time. Or if you are someone who likes to layer your vegetables to make sure that they get cooked at the proper amounts, each one, I would start with the onions, cook until they are soft, then add in the potatoes and carrots and cook them till they're soft because they take a little longer, and then add in the cabbage last. So if you are being a layering style cook, you can do it that way. If you are being a quick cook, you can do it as a one pot dish like this, and it will, I promise it will be delicious either way. So we're just going to turn this heat on about medium high to get it started. And a lot of that liquid is going to cook out of the cabbage, and this is just going to start to saute. And what makes this the dish that it is the seasonings that we put in it. So we are going to start with some cumin. We put about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of cumin. If you really like cumin, you can add a little bit more. So I'm just going to throw some cumin in there. Do not skip the turmeric in this dish. This really is one of the things that makes this dish what it is. Turmeric is a root that you can actually grow inside if you want to. Same thing about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of turmeric. You can grow it in a pot. And turmeric root is also a great medicine. It's a really good anti-inflammatory. So you can take it for any kind of inflammation. If you have chronic inflammation like arthritis, turmeric root is a great thing to just add into your diet. Any kind of inflammation. I was taking turmeric earlier because I got a little carpal tunnel in my hands, and it helped. All right, so I'm just mixing that in, and you can also adjust the seasonings to your taste, though. So if this is not looking turmeric-y enough for you, like not yellow enough, it doesn't have enough of that pungent kind of smell to it, you can add a little more turmeric. If you want a little more of that cumin-y goodness, go ahead and throw some in. And the last ingredient that you do not want to forget is the salt. So same thing, about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of salt. I'm just using my hand as a measuring tool. once you've made a recipe enough times, I'm sure many of you out there kind of stop using measuring utensils, and I do that too, and that is okay. And a lot of the people who come through this kitchen don't actually measure when they cook anymore at this point. All right, so I'm just gonna get that going, and if you want it to cook evenly, you can put a top on it, and the potatoes will kind of steam a little bit there in that cabbagey goodness, because there's a lot of water in that cabbage. It kind of adds the water for you for steaming. So I'm just going to pop this little top on here and let that be for a little minute. All right, and that is so simple, isn't it? That's Ethiopian cabbage. You just cook it until it is soft, and I like to cook it till it's there's a little bit of crispy edges on the potatoes, if you can. So that's the Ethiopian cabbage. So delicious. You all are in for a treat. And in the meantime, I'm going to check on the ingredients for Colcannon, which is an Irish potato and cabbage dish. Also delicious. Very different flavor. Doesn't use turmeric, doesn't use cumin, doesn't use olive oil. The Irish one is all about dairy. You can use half and half of milk, and you use an entire half a stick of butter. So that is part of what makes it delicious. So I am going to bring you all over here to check out the cabbage that I have boiling in this pan. So this is simply a chopped up about a pound of cabbages. You want a pound of cabbage to a pound of potatoes is kind of what I go for with this recipe. So this cabbage is looking nice and soft, so that's about ready to go. And I'm going to just see, you want the potatoes soft and you want the cabbage soft to make this. Because what we're going to do is actually mash the potatoes and the cabbage. Some people chop it and some people actually put it in a blender and blend it for this dish. So 2 different ways of doing it. And I think this cabbage is soft enough that I'm going to go ahead and take it off the heat. It just was boiling in plain old water. And I'm just going to pour it through a colander to get the water out of it. And it smells like boiled cabbage, y'all. And if you're putting it in a blender, you can just throw it on in. If you're going to chop it, you might want to add just a touch of cool water so it's not nuclear hot when you're trying to chop it. But you want the cabbage ideally to stay a little bit warm for when you assemble this recipe together. Okay. So let me move my delicious dairy items over here for a minute. If you don't use dairy, you can make this recipe too with oat milk and with vegan butter. And it tastes pretty good that way too. I would say not as delicious. This really was designed for dairy. So I'm just going to chop this up. Like I said, you can pop it in a blender too. And green cabbage is really the thing for this. I've never seen Colcannon made with red cabbage, and I can't imagine what it would be like. Okay. All right, so there is my cabbage chopped. And the next thing I'm going to do is dice up my onion. So if I was doing a full recipe, it would be a full onion, a full pound of cabbage, and a full pound of potatoes. I'm doing about a half a recipe, again, because we're making 2 recipes. And I'm just going to dice up these onions. You can, if you want to use leeks instead of onions, also super delicious. In fact, if you have leeks, I prefer using leeks for this over onions. And they are in season towards the fall, so it's a nice warming dish. If you plant potatoes and cabbage now, this is the time for harvesting the early season crop. It's also the time for planting a mid-season crop that you can then harvest in the fall. So once the weather starts getting chilly and your fall potatoes and your fall cabbage and your fall carrots and your fall onions are coming up, you can make this dish and it's going to be super delicious. So I'm going to just grab this same saucepan that I use to cook my cabbage, and I'm going to put about a cup of milk in here. I'm using half and half because it's what we have. It also adds a little bit of a richer taste. So I'm going to take this milk and I'm going to actually put the onions or the leeks right into the milk. Okay. And you want just enough milk to cover your onions is sort of what you're going for. So if I was using a full onion, that would be about a cup of milk to cover the onions. And then I'm going to simmer these onions in this milk. I know it sounds a little odd, but I'm going to simmer the onions in the milk until the onions are soft. All right. And then I think these potatoes are probably ready to go. So I'm going to drain these just like I drained the cabbage. Get the water out of them. Ooh, it smells so good. There's nothing like the smell of a delicious cooked potato. And I'm just going to actually put it right back in the pot that it came from. And I am going to grab a potato masher real fast. Something we can mash the potatoes with anyway. Right. Here's my handy dandy potato masher. And I'm simply going to start mashing the potatoes. If your potatoes don't mash easily, it means they weren't quite cooked through all the way. So keep them cooking until they're easily mashable. So there we go. This recipe does call for a little bit of salt and pepper, so this would be a great time to add those in. We don't have any black pepper at the moment, so I'm going to skip that for this demo, but you can put it in if you have it. Again, it's just about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of salt. This recipe really doesn't have much in the way of seasonings beyond the dairy and the salt and the taste of the vegetables themselves. All right. Okay, and while those onions are getting soft in the milk, let's check on our Ethiopian cabbage. Let me grab this. Ooh, yes. This is looking just like it should, and it is smelling just like it should. Yum! I love this, and I could eat this for a whole dinner with nothing but this. And you see how the potatoes are getting a little bit stuck to the bottom? I secretly love that because then you get those crispy potato edges. Those are delicious. All right, this is looking good. So we'll let that keep going for a little while longer. And I'm going to check on my milk. It is simmering, and the onions in here are simmering along happily with it. So that's looking great. Okay. And I think I'm going to call this good. And then I'm going to take this milk and pour it in with those mashed potatoes that I just mashed. And then I'm going to take the cabbage. The cabbage in there as well. This is a little bit much milk for the amount of potatoes. Since I did a half a recipe, I think I did a full recipe of milk and a half recipe of everything else. So normally when you make this, it wouldn't look quite so soupy. It would look more like mashed potato consistency. So if you had added your full pound of potatoes, that would have been good. It would have been perfect. And since I'm doing a half a recipe too, I'm just going to do a half a cup of butter, which is a quarter stick. And guess what you do with it? Blunk. And you just mix it on in there. and you end up with this beautiful mashed potato dish with cabbage. I have also substituted kale and other greens for the cabbage if I don't have cabbage for this dish. Also delicious. You can substitute in a number of different things as long as they're green, I would say. So think of any greens that are cabbage-ish in the same cabbage family. So cabbage, kale. Collard greens might not cook quick enough for this dish, but cabbage is my favorite. Kale, I would say, is my second favorite for this. So there is Colcannon, and like I said, it would normally be a little thicker with the potatoes. I did half of the potatoes I would have for the amount of milk that I put. Colcannon, delicious Irish dish with potatoes and cabbage. And over here, we have our delicious dairy-free, I guess this one really is vegan, Ethiopian cabbage with turmeric and cumin and carrots, in addition to the onions and the potatoes and the cabbage. So there you have it. Two really easy, really fast ways to make delicious dishes from two very different cultural food traditions with two really different flavor profiles using the same three vegetables, your onions, your cabbage, and your potatoes. I hope you all enjoy them, and if you have other ideas of dishes that you all make with those crops that you'd like to share, pop them in the comments. We'd love to hear it, and maybe add them to our menu in the kitchen. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.